let's get started. I like to start every lecture with a song, and this is one that has been in my heart since 2016, and so we'll start. So the title of the lecture today is Generational Trauma of the Repudiation of Imago Dei, Racial Superiority and Dehumanization. I will obviously go through these words because it's a lot of them, but can anyone tell me, at least just looking at this, what they think I might be talking about? Anybody know any of these words? No? Okay, so repudiate means to reject with denial. So we're going to be talking about basically rejecting the humanity and one another. And because this is a Christian university and I am a Christian, I really am going to be doing this from, in a lot of ways, more of a Christian worldview. So if you are not a Christian in the room, that's fine. I'm just giving you kind of, this is what I will be speaking from. And so Imago Dei, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's a Latin word just meaning the image of God. So let's get to it. What does this mean? So we're going to see that the dehumanization of enslaved people traumatizes both whites and blacks in America. That is how I spell America because I'm petty. One definition of trauma is an emotional wound or shock that creates substantial, lasting damage to one's psychological development, often leading to neurosis. And the neurosis is defined as a various mental or emotional disorders involving symptoms such as insecurity, anxiety, depression, or irrational fears. And so we're going to spend a great deal of time talking about whiteness as a construct. And so I want you to remember that, especially if you're a white person in this room. I am not talking to you directly, right? So I'm talking about whiteness as a construct, and we're going to kind of talk about the history of that, how it was created, why it was created, and how it is affecting us all today. And a lot of it is bad news, so I just said that. But let's talk about some good news really quick, because Christians, WWJD, right? What would Jesus do? And so I think about Christ, and I think about Christ's example of like when someone was sick or was being disturbed by demons, Christ never just like ignored them and was just like, okay, like you'll be fine. But he really did go to that problem, right? He had them, oftentimes they announced what that problem was. And so it's kind of this admission of, hey, there's an issue, let's fix this. And so I think one of the ways that we think about healing when it comes to any instance, but especially like, you know, our racial disparities that we're having, like we have to address the problem, right? And so we are going to do that in this next 30 minutes, 40 minutes, just kind of head on. We're going to name what this issue is and then kind of talk about ways that we can solve it. Just a side note, white guilt and white omission, I think are the opposite ends of the same coin, right? And so it's kind of this like, if you, at the end of my lecture, if you're like, oh man, I feel bad for being white, then I've not done my job. That is not what I'm here to do. It's not effective. It's not helpful. It's a waste of energy, right? So let's not do that. But also let's not admit that there is no problem, right? And let's actually be like, hey, this is a problem. We are all suffering through it. And so let's figure out how we can heal. So to go to our definitions, so we're going to talk about epigenetics, right? And we kind of heard this phrase with Dr. Joy DeGruy, generational trauma. And so I have a diagram here. All right, I'm going to come on this side because I can see it better. So what is genetics, right? And so we are all familiar with what a DNA looks like, right? And so epi is from the Greek prefix meaning on, about, or over. And so essentially what is this saying? It's kind of these like tags that are on your genes. And so can somebody on the front row, because you can see it, kind of read these two paragraphs for me? Go ahead.
Identical twins are clones. They are born with the same sequence of DNA. When twins are young, they look the same. Even mannerisms may be the same. As twins get older, they have different environmental exposures, what they eat, and their activities are not identical. This can lead to different body features such as obesity and different diseases such as heart disease and cancer.
Go ahead and read this one.
Diet, exercise, and exposure to harmful things like smoke and UV rays from the sun can change your epigenetic tags. You are especially vulnerable to epigenetic changes during critical periods like puberty and pregnancy.
All right, and then finally it says DNA and genes don't change. So that's not what we're saying, right? So this aspect of your DNA and genes are never going to change, but these can change. Kind of these tags that are attached to your DNA can change, and they can change throughout generations, right? And it says, but living a healthy lifestyle will influence your epigenetic tags and improve your health. So basically, all of this is saying, simply put, you are a product of your environment, right? And so our society teaches us from the time that we are young, right? Our culture within our homes, but also the culture that we live in, it gives us our worldview. It teaches us how do we view the world, how do we understand ourselves and our roles and our relationships to the world, how do we understand God, or how do we understand animals, all of those other things, right? And so what this is saying is throughout generations, especially when there's trauma, that trauma can be passed through generations. And Dr. Joy talked about this. I just took a screenshot towards the end of her lecture, right? She kind of listed these epigenetic tags, if you will. So contemporary suffering, right? Like white supremacy and terrorism, legal discrimination, differential treatment, right? And so kind of just like what we would experience, what you would, adaptive behavior, learned helplessness. And I remember when she was talking about like people who were just like, oh, I'm probably not going to make it to my 21st birthday, right? Like for no other reason besides like this is kind of what they've been hearing their entire lives, right? Like there's something in them that they're just like, life sucks, you know, I'm probably going to get killed before my 21st birthday, right? You kind of hear that over generations and generations. When I saw this, I was thinking about reading Homegoing, and I'm like, I feel like a lot of these are represented in the story. And I know Professor Gugina said you guys kind of talked about that through the first couple of chapters. So if you have your notes from when you talked about that, someone just read out to me, what are some of these that you see within the story? Or some other traumatic tags that we've seen in Homegoing in the different characters? Yeah?
H was arrested just for looking at a white woman.
Yep, arrested just for looking at a white woman. Anybody else? Yeah.
So I think it was in Willie's chapter, she mentioned that her father had died like right after her son was born, and said like my parents weren't expected to live long anyway.
Wow, that was a good one. Anybody else? 3 more. Just because you don't look at me doesn't mean I won't call you. Yeah.
The horizontal oppression between the society and the policy
Mm-hmm.
people groups, always battling with each other,
Yeah.
and trying to enslave one another.
Yeah, because if I put you in slavery, that means I'm not going to be in slavery, right? So, yeah, this kind of self-protection. 2 more. Yeah.
A lot of people experience post-traumatic stress disorder, just like from either witnessing trauma or being, experiencing trauma themselves.
Yeah, and Dr. Joy talked about that, right? Like she gave the example of 9/11, how there are some people experiencing traumatic effects in their body just from watching 9/11 on TV, right? Compared to those who were there, and they're the same symptoms, right? And so this direct or indirect trauma. 1 more. Yeah.
It seems like, especially like this is also in Lily's chapter, when Robert reacts so violently whenever he's questioned about like if he's actually black or not, or if he's white, because it shows that number one, he's like internalized the oppression of white society, that even though genetically he presents mostly white,
Yep.
and usually when people present as like a certain race or like ethnicity, like that's how they classify themselves. Just because he has any black ancestry, he's automatically labeled by white society as black.
Yep.
Because that's like tainted.
Yep.
And then whenever he's told that he's not black because he's too white,
Yep.
then he reacts really violently because he like has no like community.
Yeah, that's really good. Anybody else? I know I said one more, but if you have something burning you want to say. No? All right. So for another definition, let's talk about Imago Dei. Can somebody read this slide for me? Yeah.
What is Imago Dei? What does it mean to be created in the image of God? Pete ends. Many scholars draw a parallel between the image of God in Genesis and images of kings in the ancient world. Rulers could not be everywhere at once, and travel was slow. So they would erect monuments or statues of themselves throughout their kingdom. These images let everyone know that the king's rule extended wherever his image was found.
Okay, so what it is in my opinion that this is what separates us from animals, right? Is that we are created in the image of God. We have the ability to think and to reason, the ability to adapt, right? And so another definition by Steve Lemke says the image of God is the reflection, likeness, similarity of God's essence, which he created in human beings, and is reflected most notably in the person, spiritual, relational, rational, volitional, moral, responsible, and emotional aspects of human life. This is what separates us from creatures. And so, came too soon, Kanye. So epigenetics and Imago Dei, like how are we putting this together, right? We kind of talked about what epigenetics is. Are we clear on kind of what epigenetics means? Should we go back to that? That's a real question. Remember, none of my questions are rhetorical. We clear on that from the lecture of Dr. Joy and kind of what I just said? Okay, so here we go. Come on, Kanye. Houseway. How do these connect with each other? So I'm gonna put up some quotes, and we will see that. Race is the child of racism, not the father. What's your name in the hat? Nautica hat? Braxton. Yeah. Can you? What does this mean?
That racism isn't especially. It didn't come up. Races became races after people realized that there were differences between people and wanted to come at that.
Yeah. Can you read this for me? His name is Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Ta-Nehisi Coates states, Americans believe in the reality of race as a defined, indubitable feature of the natural world. Racism, the need to ascribe bone-deep features to people and then humiliate, reduce, and destroy them, inevitably follows from this inalterable condition. In this way, racism is rendered as the innocent daughter of Mother Nature. But race is the child of racism, not the father. And the process of naming the people has never been a matter of genealogy and physiognomy so much as one of hierarchy.
So basically what he's saying is that, I don't know, but I've heard people say this, well, there's racism because we have different races. So Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying, no. The fact that there's racism is because there was this thing created as race, right? To develop this hierarchy with white being at top, right? And all the other races being subservient. Triggered. This woman, she's just a fantastic educator. Let's watch this real quick.
Well, I said if I were black, they'd kill me a long time ago. And if I were black and saying the things I say, I wouldn't be alive. Bullshit! No, you're not gonna say I'm sorry there's racism. No, I do not have to ask you nicely. I consider this exercise an injection of the live virus of racism. I watched my students become what I told them they were. I watch little wonderful brown-eyed white people become vicious, ugly, nasty, discriminating, domineering people in the space of 15 minutes. I watch brilliant little blue-eyed white Christian children become timid and frightened and angry and unable to learn in the space of 15 minutes. If you do that with a whole group of people for a lifetime, you change them psychologically. You convince those who are analogous to the brown-eyed people that they are superior, that they are perfect, that they have the right to rule. Did you learn anything this morning?
I think I learned from the experience of feeling like I was in a glass cage and I was powerless. I realized this morning that there were very few times in my life that I've ever been discriminated against, very few.
And you convince those who take the place of blue-eyed students that they are less than. How did they feel yesterday? Down like a dog on a leash. If you do that for a lifetime, what do you suppose that does to them? You find out that there are people of color who refuse to live down to our expectations of them. I'm now watching, at the national level, that exercise that I did based on eye color being reenacted in the government of the United States of America. I've done this with people of all ages for the last 50 years. Now think about that. Next year it will be the 50th anniversary of the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. and the beginning of the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. When are we going to learn? When are we going to put a stop to this? White people's number one freedom in the United States of America is the freedom to be totally ignorant about those who are other than white. We live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. White people are the free, and people of color have to be brave. I want this situation to change. I want it to be such that no black person has to have courage to get up in the morning, any more than I, as a white person, have to have courage to get up in the morning. This is the most important book you or I or anybody else will ever read. I'm an educator. Every educator should refuse to perpetuate the myth of white superiority. There's only one race. It's the human race.
I don't know if there's a video that I found that really explains epigenetics more than she just did. Can you, Jamie, read this? This is from 1997.
When some Englishmen entered slave trading directly, it became clear that many of the English public had misgivings about slave trading and recreating slavery on English soil. It was an era where the ideals of equality, justice, democracy, and human rights were becoming dominant features of Western political philosophy. Those involved in the trade rationalized their actions by arguing that the Africans were heathens after all, and it was a Christian duty to save their souls. By the early part of the 18th century, the institution was fully established for Africans and their descendants. Large numbers of slaves flooded the southern colonies and even some northern ones. Sometimes they outnumbered whites, and the laws governing slavery became increasingly harsher.
Let's talk about this. Every time I read this, I'm like, I think about the intentionality that it took to dehumanize an entire group of people, right? And Dr. Joy she talked about that term, like cognitive dissonance, right? Like this, like if your behaviors don't line up with what you're thinking, there's this tension within inside of you, right? And so if I view you as a fellow human and I am abusing you, there's this tension inside of me. I'm not going to be okay, right? So I have to do one or two things. I either need to change my behavior and stop abusing you, but then that it doesn't satisfy me. I don't make money off of that. So I'm going to change my thoughts about you, right? Like I'm going to then no longer see you as a human, so that way I can continue to treat you however I want and then not feel bad about that, right? Here's another one. This is from the Dred Scott case in 1857. Can you read it for me?
In the opinion of the court, the legislation and histories of the times and the language used in the Declaration of Independence showed that neither the class of persons who had been imported as slaves, nor their descendants, whether they had become free or not, were then acknowledged as a part of the people, nor intended to be included in the general words used in that memorable instrument. They had, for
very clear. We did not write the Declaration of Independence for anybody that wasn't white. This is who we wrote it for. Because of that, so what if we violate your rights? What rights? You're not human. Right? Like, so far inferior, right? Not just like, all right, like I'm human and you're like, right here's like this is this kind of beneath, like, some people actually have and still continue to treat their animals better than they treat black folk. We're gonna watch a video. This I have to find. Give me a second. This doctor is doing really good work, and he's talking about. He's talking about reasons why black women are more prone to dying in childbirth than any other race.
Crisis that has ballooned out of control. Who in particular is being affected the most?
If you're an African American mother, your risks of dying in childbirth are 3 to 4 times higher than if you're white. African American women are less believed when they express that they have concerns about their symptoms, particularly around pain.
Dr. Shaw has taken it upon him.
So this is a doctor. They just did this. I think it was March 2018, right? This is a doctor literally saying, we don't believe black women. Why though? Because of this history that we just talked about, right? It's just like, if you're not human, I don't have to believe that you're in pain, right? I don't have to believe. Dr. Joy, you kind of heard it where she talked about the father of gynecology, right? How he would do all of these experiences on black women without anesthesia. Why? If you're not human, you don't feel pain. I don't even have to care about that, right? So still in 2018, we're seeing this continuation of these ideologies, and he's admitting it, right? Like, we don't believe him, so they'll die. Yeah.
Over the summer, I worked as a scribe at Lincoln Hospital, and an African American woman and her husband came in, and she was explaining symptoms of like, my neck is hurting, my throat hurts, my back hurt, my feet hurt. And just before, we were in a room with a white woman. She was middle-aged, and she was just kind of like, oh yeah, my day's great, and this and that, and oh yeah, my throat hurts. And the doctor was like, oh, when did this start? What happened? What'd you eat? And I saw as I was typing, she was listing out everything. He's just kind of like looking at her. He looked at him, and then he asked me, "Did you get everything?" And I'm just like, "Wait, aren't you supposed to ask her when did this start? When did this?" And I just kind of was like,
Yeah. So you saw it, like that there was this like, oh, I gotta scratch your throat. Okay, like let me figure out. And then this black woman has all this other stuff, and then you know what I'm saying. And I'm gonna make this point later, excuse me. But like, it's in all of us, right? Like we are all so. I really do. The only way I can describe it is this sense of like this demonic oppression, right? That really has a hold on us. That perpetuates this dehumanization of black people. So I'm going to show you some pictures. They're not in chronological order because that would be too type A for my personality. But there are some pictures. There are a lot, and so we'll pause and we'll read them. Great sale of slaves, January 10th, 1855. This is what we're selling. $3, age 20 to 26, strong, able-bodied. 1 winch, Sally, age 42, excellent cook. 1 winch, age 26, with a 6-month-old pickaninny. $1, age 52, 17 bucks, age 12 to 20. John Carter, Esquire. What about this one? Around blacks, never relax. Victims of forced busing, awake. Man. Forced busing will result in a race of mulattoes. We don't want half whites and half blacks. B is for black. Every time I read this, I think about how many songs in our Christian tradition do we have where we are asking God to make us white as snow? How many? How many of them is the whole notion of anything other than white is disgusting, is dirty, right? Without light, it's dark, it's illegal, it's dim. God, white Jesus, make me white as snow. How many of them? How many times do we kind of talk about this dichotomy of light and white being pure and holy and good, and black being bad and evil and demonic, right? And so if I'm growing up throughout the years and I'm hearing this in the songs of my faith, what am I thinking about myself? What are you thinking about me, right? Like if we're hearing this, right, over and over again, this kind of just like, you know, white is right and pure and holy, black is bad, right? There we go. Who needs niggers? Back to the trees, boogies. White people, wake up before it's too late. You may not have another chance. Franklin Graham favors the mingling of races. Willis Smith for senator. He will uphold the traditions of the South. This is from Know the Truth Committee. Beauty Beast. Before I move forward, because some of these next pictures are pretty violent, let's talk about those images that we just saw. What emotional response do we have to them? Someone who hasn't talked. What's your name?
Abby.
Abby.
I'm shocked at like the amount of ridiculousness and how it was like conditioned to be normal. Like the one about buses, and it was like listing everything, and then it was like cannibalism. Like as if that would ever happen.
Yeah, Christina.
I'm kind of concerned at how overt it is. Like this isn't just like underlying, like this is, and it's not that long ago. So I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going back to like what we were talking about last class. Just like the fact that they came up with all these laws to cover like that cognitive dissonance that they were having. Instead of just deciding that this behavior is bad, they really like thought that these things were okay and would make it okay for them to be doing this to people.
Yeah. Has it changed? We talked about it being overt, right? We kind of talked about these laws. Has it changed? That's a real question. Raise your hand if you think it has. Don't be ashamed. If you think some has changed. Okay. All right. All the rest of you saying you think it doesn't, or you're unsure?
I think it's changed form. So I'm not even going to say that it's not overt. It definitely still exists outwardly. People are still racist. People are still overtly racist. We obviously don't see those exact pictures anymore, but it's just changed form. It's not. It hasn't gotten better, and it's just it's different now.
Yeah.
It's evolved.
Yeah. Anybody else? I would say that it's still pretty overt. in the media, the next couple of pictures I'm going to show you are pretty recent, and there's some killings of some black men via the police. And I'll kind of talk about those stories and kind of how I see those situations, but I don't see it being covert. I see a lot of the same symbols, and we'll see some more of those here in a second. Okay, well, we're not getting that yet. Help save the youth of America. Who are the youth of America? Who are we talking about?
What youth in America?
Right. Don't buy Negro records. If you don't want to serve Negroes in your place of business, then don't have a Negro record in your jukebox or listen to the Negro records on the radio. The screaming, idiotic words, the savage music of these records are undermining the morals of our white youth in America. Here we go. This just happened pretty recently. This Dove article. So right here, I don't know, I can't see what year this was, but you have a black kid in a tub, right, being washed. Being washed what? White as snow. So you have this. Dove thought this was cute. You wash your body with Dove, gets all the dirt off, turn into a nice white lady. That's fun. Also Dove, shimmering glow and soft shimmer, nourishing lotion from normal to dark skin. Normal to dark. That's fun. All lives matter, some restrictions may apply. I just think this is funny because it's true. That's because I have dark humor. This is Mike Brown. Mike Brown was shot in the back by the police a few times, Officer Darren Wilson, and was left in the street for 4 hours. Laying in his blood as his entire community watched. 4 hours. Because he was a thug. I visited, there's a memorial, and I visited this apartment complex. And because I had been following the story really closely, because this one really, really hit me. I was living in Texas at the time. And I remember in the reports, the officer was saying how Mike was walking in the street, you know, whatever. I visited this apartment complex. There's where he was, there's really no sidewalk. Like this kind of, this little piece, but it stops, right? And so the only way that you can walk from apartment complex to apartment complex is in the street, right? But yeah, left him there for 4 hours. It was on CNN. And very much this like highway patrol deal with animals on the side of the road quicker than they've dealt with Mike Brown's body. Broad daylight. It was August in St. Louis, Missouri. The weather in St. Louis is nothing lower than like what your armpits feel like after you've been in the gym. So like, it was hot. And this young boy, because he was a boy, he was still a teenager, just graduated high school, was laying in the hot St. Louis heat for 4 hours dead with his community watching. Talk about trauma, right? Direct or indirect, I don't even know. Both. In that moment. Also that night, I have friends who live in St. Louis who was involved in the Ferguson protest. That night, the community, so his bloodline went from like here to about right here in the street. And that night, the community went and laid roses like in the middle. And it wasn't really blocking anything because there's two sides you can go. And around 2 a.m. The next day, the police came through and rolled right through it. There were like about 5 cars. Just very overt F you. This is Philando Castile. Philando was in a car with his girlfriend and young daughter, who I think was 4 at the time. The officer pulled him over. I think it was a broken tail light. The officer asked if he had any weapons on him, and he said, yes, I have a license to carry. Let me get my license out. As he was reaching his back pocket, the officer shot him in the car with his 4-year-old daughter and his girlfriend. And he died in that car because it took a while for the ambulance to come. Because the officer was afraid for his life. Why? Why was he scared? These pictures are really interesting to me. I believe this was in Ferguson during a protest. You see the difference? Over here, protecting the statue of some racist general. And over here, all of this armor for people with no weapons. Over and over and over again, it is ingrained in us, right? Black people are violent. They are evil. One of the reasons, and Dr. Joy talked about this, one of the reasons that the lynchings were so popular post-slavery and like during civil rights time was because white people were afraid that what? Black people were going to treat them the way in which white people treated black people. It has never happened. So what's my point? That's a lot, right? Let's sit in that for a little bit. That's a lot. So my point is that each and every one of us in this room, all of our families and friends, all of us, we have been traumatized by white supremacy. The way that we view each other, this irrational fear that we have of black men, right? The last time I was here, I asked how many of you heard black people are just lazy. Black women are always having an attitude, right? Over and over again, these messages, right? And so then when you see black women have an attitude, who probably someone did something to her to irritate her, right? Like there's this like, they're always angry. They always have an attitude. Why? Because we believe these narratives, right? The last time we was here, we talked about truth. Like, who holds the power of truth, right? What is true? Is it true that black people are lazy? Is it true that black people are inferior to white people? So we would say no in this class, but our actions, they don't actually line up with that. So there's cognitive dissonance within us, and even in my own self, to say, like, no, like I'm black and I'm proud to be black, but sometimes I'm like, if I had an option, I might not keep choosing to live this way in America. You know what I'm saying? And so we all are affected by this notion of white supremacy because it's what our society and our culture has told us as true. So then what does it take to actually get out of that? What are some of your thoughts? Just on anything. This is time for question and answers. Oh, I have one more little comic relief. What are some thoughts? Talk back to me.